The Quidditch Final. Chapter 15. 325-487 bu kitapta bitiyor. He sent me this, Hermione said, holding out the letter. Harry took it. The parchment was damp and enormous teardrops had smudged the ink so badly in places that it was very difficult to read. Bu hep çok üzücü oluyor. Hagrid'in böyle mektuplar yazması. Dear Hermione. Sadece Hermione'ye yazmış. We lost. I'm allowed to bring him back to Hogwarts. Execution date to be fixed. Beaky has enjoyed London. I won't forget all the help you gave us, Hagrid. They can't do this, said Harry. They can't. Buckbeak isn't dangerous. Malfoy's that is frightened the committee into it, said Hermione, wiping her eyes. You know what he's like. Cidden piçin teki, özür dilerim. They're a bunch of doddery old fools and they were scared. There will be an appeal, though there always is. Only I can't see any hope. Nothing will have changed. Yeah, it will, said Ron fiercely. You won't have to do all the work alone this time, Hermione. I'll help. Oh, Ron! Hermione flung her arms around Ron's neck and broke down completely. Ron, şerefsiz Ron. Ron, looking quite terrified, patted her very awkwardly on the top of the head. Finally, Hermione drew away. Ron, I'm really sorry about Scabbers, she sobbed. Tabi aynen şimdi bu Hagrid'in ne kadar üzüldüğünü de görüyor falan Hermione bir yandan. Cidden üzgün de hissediyor kendini. Ama bilmiyorum. Hermione'ye kızmıyorum ben. Hermione'ye kızmıyorum. Kızasım gelmiyor bir şekilde. Oh well, he was old, said Ron, looking truly relieved that she had let go of him. And he was a bit useless. You never know. Mom and Dad might get me and all now. The safety measures imposed on the students since Black's second break-in made it impossible for Harry, Ron, and Hermione to go and visit Hagrid in the evenings. Their only chance of talking to him was during Care of Magical Creatures lessons. He seemed numb with shock at the verdict. It's all my fault. Got all tongue-tied. They was all sitting there in black robes and I kept dropping me notes and forgetting all them days you looked up for me, Hermione. Biliyorum bu hissi, Hagrid. And then Lucius Malfoy stood up and said his bit. And the comedy just did exactly what he told him. There's still the appeal, said Ron fiercely. Don't give up yet. We're working on it. They were walking back up to the castle with the rest of the class. Ahead they could see Malfoy, who was walking with Crabbe and Goyle, and kept looking back, laughing derisively. It's no good, Ron, said Hagrid sadly as they reached the castle steps. That comedy is in Lucius Malfoy's pocket. I'm just gonna make sure the rest of Beaky's time is the happiest he's ever had. I owe him that. Hagrid turned around and hurried back toward his cabin, his face buried in his handkerchief. Look at him blubber. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle had been standing just inside the castle doors, listening. Ne olacak işte, Harry kazanmalısın, Sinici Malfoy'dan önce yakalamalısın, işte intikam Harry falan. Have you ever seen anything quite as pathetic, said Malfoy, and it's supposed to be our teacher. Harry and Ron both made furious moves toward Malfoy, but Hermione got there first. Smack, pot. She had slapped Malfoy across the face with all the strength she could muster. Malfoy staggered. Harry, Ron, Crabbe, and Goyle stood flabbergasted as Hermione raised her hand again. Don't you dare call Hagrid pathetic, you fool, you evil. Hermione, said Ron weakly, and he tried to grab her hand as she swung it back. Get off, Ron. Hermione pulled out her wand. Jesus, şimdi cidden tehlikeli. Malfoy stepped backward. Crabbe and Goyle looked at him for instructions. Truly bewildered. Come on, Malfoy muttered, and in a moment all three of them had disappeared into the passageway to the dungeons. Böyle giderken bir alay etmeye falan da götü yemedi. Çünkü Hermione bir büyü yapıverirdi, böyle ebesininkini görürdü yani. Hermione, Ron said again, sounding both stunned and impressed. Harry, you'd better beat him in the Quidditch final. Harry, yapmalısın bunu. Hermione said cheerily, you just better head, because I can't stand it if Slytherin wins. We're due in charms, said Ron. Still goggling at Hermione, we'd better go. They hurried up the marble staircase toward Professor Flitwick's classroom. You're late, boys, said Professor Flitwick reprovingly as Harry opened the classroom door. Come along, quickly, one's out. We're experimenting with cheating charms today. We've already dived into pairs. Güzel dersmiş. Harry and Ron hurried to a desk at the back and opened their bags. Ron looked behind him. Where is Hermione gone? Harry looked around too. Hermione hadn't entered the classroom, yet Harry knew she had been right next to him when he had opened the door. That's weird, said Harry, staring at Ron. Maybe she went to the bathroom or something. But Hermione didn't turn up. Oh, listen. She could have done with a cheating charm on her too, said Ron. Gülümseme, gülme, neşelenme charm. Herhalde. Said Ron as the class left for lunch, all grinning broadly. The cheating charms had left them with a feeling of great contentment. Hermione wasn't at lunch either. By the time they had finished their apple pie, the after effects of the cheating charms were wearing off, and Harry and Ron had started to get slightly worried. You don't think Malfoy did something to her? Ron said anxiously as they hurried upstairs toward Gryffindor Tower. They passed the security trolls, gave the fat lady the password Gibbet, and scrambled through the portrait hall into the common room. Hermione was sitting at a table, fast asleep, her head resting on an open arithmetic book. They went to sit down on either side of her. Harry prodded her awake. What? Said Hermione, waking with a start and staring widely around. Is it time to go? Which lesson have we got now? Divination, but it's not for another 20 minutes, said Harry. Hermione, why didn't you come to Charms? But, oh no, Hermione squeaked. I forgot to go to Charms. But how could you forget, said Harry. You were with us till we were right outside the classroom. I don't believe it, Hermione wailed. Was Professor Flitwick angry? Oh, it was Malfoy. I was thinking about him and I lost track of things. You know what, Hermione, said Ron, looking down at the enormous daha doğru. Arithmetic book Hermione had been using as a pillow. I reckon you're cracking up. You're trying to do too much. No, I'm not, said Hermione, brushing her hair out of her eyes and staring hopelessly around for her bag. Yemin ederim aynı şeyi ben de hissettim bu dönem. Ben de bu dönem 8 ders aldım. Geçen dönem daha doğrusu bitti artık da. Bilmiyorum. Hani ben saldım. Ben dersleri saldım. Şimdi Hermione her dersten en iyi notu alacağım kafasında olduğu için onun çatlaması gayet normal. Ama ben direkt saldım. No, I'm not, said Hermione, brushing her hair out of her eyes and staring hopelessly around for her bag. I just made a mistake, that's all. I'd better go and see Professor Flitwick and say sorry. I see you in divination. Hermione joined them at the foot of the ladder to Professor Trelawney's classroom 20 minutes later, looking extremely harassed. Jesus, bence bu bölümde Professor Trelawney kehanette bulunacak Harry'e. I can't believe I missed cheating charms, and I bet they come up in our exams. Professor Flitwick hinted they might. Together they climbed the ladder into the dim, stifling tower room. Glowing on every little table was a crystal ball full of pearly white mist. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat down together at the same rickety table. I thought we weren't starting crystal balls until next term, Ron muttered, casting a very wary eye around for Professor Trelawney in case she was lurking nearby. Don't complain, this means we're finished, Paul Mastery, Harry muttered back. I was getting sick of her flinching every time she looked at my hands. Bu Paul Mystery, nasıl okunuyor emin değilim de el falı gibi bir şey herhalde. Good day to you, said the familiar, misty voice, and Professor Trelawney made her usual dramatic entrance out of the shadows. Parvati and Lavender quivered with excitement, their faces lit by the milky glow of their crystal ball. I have decided to introduce the crystal ball a little earlier than I had planned, said Professor Trelawney, sitting with her back to the fire and gazing around. The fates have informed me that your examination in June will concern the orb, and I am anxious to give you sufficient practice. Hermione snorted. Well, honestly, the fates have informed her who sets the exam. She does. What an amazing prediction, she said, not troubling to keep her voice low. Harry and Ron choked back laughs. It was hard to tell whether Professor Trelawney had heard them, as her face was hidden in shadow. She continued, however, as though she had not. Crystal gazing is a particularly refined art, she said dreamily. I do not expect any of you to see when first you peer into the orb's infinite depths. We shall start by practicing relaxing the conscious mind and its external eyes. Ron began to snigger uncontrollably and had to stuff his fist in his mouth to stifle the noise. Şeyi gördük, bu ilk derste Harry'nin ölüm şeyi, işte Harry'nin Grimm'i görme, işte Harry'nin Grimm'i gördü ya şeyde çay fincanında. Ron böyle bayağı ciddi alıp korktuydu falan. Ama böyle o yıl başındaki günden sonra gülmeye başladı. Hani Ron bile güldü falan yaptık böyle anlatıcı olarak. Ron şimdi direkt gülmeye başladı böyle. Direkt gülüyor falan. Yani Ron Hermione'leşti bu konuda. So as to clear the inner eye and the superconscious, perhaps if we are lucky, some of you will see before the end of the class. And so they began. Harry at least felt extremely foolish, staring blankly at the crystal ball, trying to keep his mind empty when thoughts such as "this is stupid" kept drifting across it. It didn't help that Ron kept breaking into silent giggles and Hermione kept tutting. Ama aslında şey diyeceğim. Şimdi eğer bu derste cidden Trelawney şey edecekse, Harry'e kehanette bulunacaksa, hani cidden şey aslında bilmiyorum. Hani Harry'i yalnız bıraktıracak bir şekilde Hermione'yi sinirlendirip kudurtup en son dersi bıraktıracak seviyeye gelecek. Hermione küreği fırlatacak. Harry küreği alıp geri götürecek. Harry tek başına dönmüş olacak. Kehanette bulunmuş olacak Trelawney'de. Hani cidden hissetmiş yani aslında. Cidden böyle yapması gerektiğini hissettiği için böyle davrandığı için Harry'e yalnız başına kehaneti sunabilmiş olacak. Böyle olunca da hani Ron Hermione'leşti ama Hermione'nin bayağı haksız olduğunun kanıtını görmüş olacağız gibi bir şey olacak. En azından bu durumda. Ay neyse anladınız ya. Of kafam karışıyor. Seen anything yet? Harry asked them after a quarter of an hour's quiet crystal gazing. Yeah, there's a burn on this table, said Ron, pointing. Someone has spilled their candle. This is such a waste of time, Hermione hissed. I could be practicing something useful. I could be catching up on cheating charms. Professor Trelawney rustled past. Would anyone like me to help them interpret the shadowy portents within their orb? She murmured over the clicking of her bangles. I don't need help, Ron whispered. It's obvious what this means. There's going to be lots of fog tonight. Both Harry and Hermione burst out laughing. Now, really, said Professor Trelawney as everyone's heads turned in their direction. Parvati and Lavender were looking scandalized. You're disturbing the clairvoyant vibrations. Bu kelimeyi çok hoşuma gittiğini hatırlıyorum. Clairvoyant. Bu içgörü, şey görü falan gibi şeyler. Clairvoyant. Yanlış hatırlamıyorsam siz de bir kontrol edin istiyorsanız. İstemiyorsanız etmeyin. We don't have to amuk çünkü. She approached their table and peered into their crystal ball. Harry felt his heart sinking. He was sure he knew what was coming. There is something here, Professor Trelawney whispered, lowering her face to the ball so that it was reflected twice in her huge glasses. Bir dakika. There is something here, Professor Trelawney whispered, lowering her face to the ball so that it was reflected twice in her huge glasses. Something moving, but what is it? Harry was prepared to bet everything he owned, including his firebolt, that it wasn't good news, whatever it was, and sure enough, my dear Professor Trelawney breathed, gazing up at Harry. It is here, plainer than ever before. My dear, stalking towered Jew, growing ever closer. Oh, for goodness' sake, said Hermione loudly, not that ridiculous grim again. Professor Trelawney raised her enormous eyes to Hermione's face. Parvati whispered something to Lavender and they both glared at Hermione too. Professor Trelawney stood up, surveying Hermione with unmistakable anger. I am sorry to say that from the moment you have arrived in this class, my dear, it has been apparent that you do not have what the noble art of divination requires. Indeed, I don't remember ever meeting a student whose mind was so hopelessly mundane. There was a moment's silence, then, fine, said Hermione suddenly, getting up and cramming and fogging the future back into her bag. Fine, she repeated, swinging the bag over her shoulder and almost knocking Ron off his chair. I give up, I'm leaving, oh, fuck you falan. Fuck the king falan yapıyor diye şeydi. Circle Again. İkinci sezonun sonunda olması lazım aynı zamanda kitapta. Joffrey yapıyordu. Fuck the city, fuck the king falan yapıyordu. O geldi aklıma. And to the whole class's amazement, Hermione strolled over to the trapdoor, kicked it open, and climbed down the ladder out of sight. İşte Hermione be. Saf inek değil, anladın mı? Gitmesi gerektiği zaman gidiyor. Posta koyması gerektiği zaman koyuyor. Hermione çünkü o. It took a few minutes for the class to settle down again. Professor Trelawney seemed to have forgotten all about the grim. She turned abruptly from Harry and Ron's table, breathing rather heavily as she touched her gauzy shawl more closely to her. Oh, said Lavender suddenly, making everyone start. Oh, Professor Trelawney, I just remembered. You saw her leaving, didn't you? Didn't you, Professor? Around Easter, one of our number will leave us forever. You said it ages ago, Professor. Jesus, cidden dediydi bu arada. Ama ben ölecek diye şey ettiydim. Ama ölmemiş demek ki. Professor Trelawney gave her a devil smile. Yes, my. Bu arada Profesör Trelawney'nin Grimm'i görmesi de doğru. Sadece Grimm olarak bir yorumlaması yapmış. Grimm'i görüyor, Sirius'u görüyor çünkü. Jesus, Abdullah falan şaka yapıyor. Professor Trelawney gave her a devil smile. Yes, my dear, I did indeed know that Miss Granger would be leaving us. One hopes, however, that one might have mistaken the signs. The inner eye can be a burden, you know. Lavender and Parvati looked deeply impressed and moved over so that Professor Trelawney could join their table instead. Someday Harmony is having, Ron muttered to Harry, looking awed. Yeah. Harry glanced into the crystal ball, but saw nothing but swirling white mist. Had Professor Trelawney really seen the Grim again? Would he? The last thing he needed was another near-fatal accident, with the Quidditch final drawing ever nearer. The Easter holidays were not exactly relaxing. The third years had never had so much homework. Neville Longbottom seemed close to a nervous collapse, and he wasn't the only one. Cold is a holiday, Seamus Finnegan. Seamus Finnegan'ın böyle patlamaları var, onlar da komiğime gidiyor baya. Roared at the common room one afternoon. The exams are ages away. What are they playing at? But nobody had as much to do as Hermione. Even without divination, she was taking more subjects than anybody else. She was usually last to leave the common room at night, first to arrive at the library the next morning. She had shadows like lupins under her eyes, and seemed constantly close to tears. Ron had taken over responsibility for Buckbeak's appeal. When he wasn't doing his own work, he was poring over enormously thick volumes with names like The Handbook of Hippogriff Psychology and Fall or Fool. A Study of Hippogriff's Brutality. Şu Fool'a bakacağım artık. Onun nasıl okunuyor onu bir çözmemiz lazım çünkü. Fool.
Foul.
Foul. Foul. Böyle miymiş lan? Fall or foul falan. Hala okuyamıyorum da neyse. A study of hippogriff brutality. He was so absorbed, he even forgot to be horrible to Crookshanks. Harry, meanwhile, had to fit in his homework around Quidditch practice every day, not to mention endless discussions of tactics with Wood. The Gryffindor-Slytherin match will take place on the first Saturday after the Easter holidays. Slytherin was leading the tournament by exactly 200 points. This meant, as Wood constantly reminded his team, that they needed to win the match by more than that amount to win the cup. It also meant that the burden of winning fell largely on Harry. Hayır, largely on them yani. Ha, bir de sana tabii. Because capturing the snitch was worth 150 points. So you must catch it only if we're more than 50 points. Bu şu yazı stili Garamon'da olsaydı onun italikleri var. O kadar bariz ki var. Yani böyle düpedüz yatıyorlar yani. Wood told Harry constantly. Only if we're more than 50 points up, Harry, or we win the match but lose the cup. You've got that, haven't you? You must catch the snitch only if we're... I know, Oliver, Harry yelled. The whole of Gryffindor house was obsessed with the coming match. Gryffindor hadn't won the Quidditch Cup since the legendary Charlie Weasley, Ron's second oldest brother, had been Seeker. But Harry doubted whether any of them even would wanted to win as much as he did. The enmity between Harry and Malfoy was at its highest point ever. Malfoy was still smarting about the mud-throwing incident in Hogsmeade and was even more furious that Harry had somehow wormed his way out of punishment. Harry hadn't forgotten Malfoy's attempt to sabotage him in the match against Ravenclaw, but it was the matter of Buckbeak that made him most determined to beat Malfoy in front of the entire school. Şöyle bir düşünce cidden bayağı sakat yani. Never in anyone's memory had a magic flourished in such a highly charged atmosphere. By the time the holidays were over, tension between the two teams and their houses was at the breaking point. A number of small scuffles broke out in the corridors, culminating in a nasty incident in which a Gryffindor fourth year and a Slytherin sixth year ended up in the hospital wing with leaks sprouting out of their ears. Aklıma şey geldi. Yeşil Sokak Holiganları diye bir film var. Bu Frodo'yu oynayan Elijah Wood, o da oynuyor. O filmdeki o yerler geldi. Tabii ufak minyatür versiyon. O film bayağı şiddetli bir film çünkü. Harry was having a particularly bad time of it. He couldn't walk to class without Slytherins sticking out their legs and trying to trip him up. Crabbe and Goyle kept popping up wherever he went and slouching away looking disappointed when they saw him surrounded by people. Jesus. Resmen Harry'i dövmek için fırsat arıyorlar. Wood had given instructions that Harry should be accompanied everywhere he went in case the Slytherins tried to put him out of action. The whole of Gryffindor House took up the challenge enthusiastically so that it was impossible for Harry to get to classes on time because he was surrounded by a vast chattering crowd. Harry was more concerned for his firebolt's safety than his own. When he wasn't flying it, he locked it securely in his trunk and frequently dashed back up to Gryffindor Tower at break times to check that it was still there. All usual pursuits were abandoned in the Gryffindor common room the night before the match. Even Hermione had put down her books. I can't work, I can't concentrate, she said nervously. There was a great deal of noise. Fred and George Weasley were dealing with the pressure by being louder and more exuberant than ever. Oliver Wood was crouched over a model of a Quidditch field in the corner, prodding little figures across it with his wand and muttering to himself. Wood'u çok seviyorum ve çok özleyeceğim çünkü son senesi gidiyor zaten. Angelina, Alicia, and Katie were laughing at Fred's and George's jokes. Harry was sitting with Ron and Hermione, removed from the center of things, trying not to think about the next day, because every time he did, he had the horrible sensation that something very large was fighting to get out of his stomach. You are going to be fine, Hermione told him, though she looked positively terrified. You've got a fireball, said Ron. Yes, said Harry, his stomach writhing. It came as a relief when Wood suddenly stood up and yelled, Tim, bad. Harry slept badly. First he dreamt. Ben de hiçbir YGS'den beri, hatta SBS'lerde dahil hiçbir sınavdan önce uyuyabildiğimi hatırlamıyorum. Yok. SBS'den önce değil. Yani SBS'den önce böyle gece 3'e 4'lere kadar falan uyuyamıyordum. Ama bu YGS, LYS'den başlayan o remedial yıllarımda girdiğim sayısız proficiency sınavlarının gecelerinin hiçbirinde uyudum hatırlamıyorum. Aynen. Ve Kars'tan İstanbul'a gelmiş oluyordum. 30 saatlik bir yolculuk ve o gece yine uyuyamıyordum. Fuck you man. Fuck you, yani şu yaşadığım şeylere bak yani. Düpedüz işkenceymiş amık ya. Allah bildiği gibi etsin yani sizi. Okulda okul olsa IQ. Sınavdan doğru düzgün bir şey yapamıyoruz. Her şey sınav, her şey ezber, her şey şık işaretleme, kalıplara gelmiş cümlelerle felsefi yazılar yazma, felsefi. Ah fuck off yani please. Hocalarıma falan demiyorum yanlış anlamayın. Ama bir şeyler iyi gitmiyor arkadaşlar. Vallahi iyi değil yani. Bunu konuşuyorduk o Sırlar Odası'nın Dual Club bölümünde zaten. İyi değil yani, tamam mı? He slept badly. First he dreamed that he had overslept and that Wood was yelling, "Where were you? We had to use Neville instead." Bak. Then he dreamed that Malfoy and the rest of the Slytherin team arrived for the match riding dragons. He was flying Targaryenler. He was flying at breakneck speed, trying to avoid a spirit of flames from Malfoy's teeth's mouth when he realized he had forgotten his fireball. Bence bu yazarı kasıtlı bir şekilde yaptığı çok hoş bir ayrıntı olmuş. Dördüncü kitapta cidden bir ejderhanın ateşinden kaçmak için kullanacak Firebolt'u. Aynen şu an şeyi görüyoruz. Yazar böyle dördüncü kitaptan elementleri böyle kitaba dağıtıyor. Cho Chang, Cedric Diggory, işte bu rüya, sonra başka bir şey gelmedi aklıma ama öyle anladınız işte. When he realized he had forgotten his firebolt, he fell through the air and walked with a start. When he realized he had forgotten his firebolt, zaten Akio diye çağıracaktı falan. Firebolt zaten orada olmaması lazım falan. Aynen, bence güzel böyle yazar kasıtlı bir şekilde bir rüya kontekstinde bir sürü şey koymuş yani şeyin içine. Şuraya. He fell through the air and walked with a start. It was a few seconds before he remembered that the match hadn't taken place yet, that he was safe in bed, and that the Slytherin team definitely wouldn't be allowed to play on dragons. He was feeling very thirsty. Quietly as he could, he got out of his four-poster and went to pour himself some water from the silver jug beneath the window. The grounds were still and quiet. No breath of wind disturbed the treetops in the forbidden forest. The humping willow was motionless and innocent-looking. It looked as though the conditions for the match would be perfect. Harry set down his goblet dedim ama goblet diyeceğim. Buna da bakalım. Nasıl okunuyormuş? Goblet. Hayır, yanlış şeye bastım.
Goblet.
Goblet. Bir dakika lan. Buna bastım, benim şu an kaydım durdu mu lan yoksa? Umarım durmamıştır deyip devam edeceğim çünkü. Goblet değil mi? Öyle dedi.
Goblet.
Goblet. İyi lan, doğru okuyormuşuz yine. Ee, e, Neredesin lan? He set down his goblet and was about to turn back to his bed when something caught his eye. An animal of some kind was prowling across the silvery lawn. Harry dashed to his bedside table, snatched up his glasses and put them on, then hurried back to the window. It couldn't be the grip. Not now, not right before the match. He peered out at the grounds again and, after a minute's frantic searching, spotted it. It was skirting the edge of the forest now. It wasn't a grip at all. It was a cat. He clutched the window ledge in relief as he recognized the bottle brush tail. It was on the Crookshanks. Or was it on the Crookshanks? Burada mesela only'yi de vurgulamasını beklerdim. Çünkü şu cümlenin amacı şey, tek başına mıydı Crookshanks? Hani Harry squinted, pressing his nose flat against the glass. Bir dakika. Or was it only Crookshanks? Aynen. Harry squinted, pressing his nose flat against the glass. Crookshanks seemed to have come to a halt. Harry was sure he could see something else moving in the shadow of the trees too. And just then it emerged, a gigantic, shaggy black dog moving stealthily across the lawn, Crookshanks trotting at its side. Harry stared. What did this mean? If Crookshanks could see the dog as well, how could it be an omen of Harry's death? Aa evet, böyle bir şey var cidden. Hani o bir vision gibi olması bekleniyor, anlatılıyor falan. Ama niye fiziksel bir şeye de sahip olmasın ki vücuda falan? Artık Crookshanks zaten ne bileyim Seamus Finnegan değil yani, otur onunla konuş tartış bir şeyleri falan. Ron, Harry hissed. Ron, wake up. Huh, I need you to tell me if you can see something. So dark, Harry, Ron muttered thickly. What are you on about? Down here. Harry looked quickly back out of the window. Crookshanks and the dog had vanished. Harry climbed onto the window sill to look right down into the shadows of the castle, but they weren't there. Where had they gone? A loud snore told him Ron had fallen asleep again. Harry and the rest of the Gryffindor team entered the Great Hall the next day to enormous applause. Harry couldn't help grinning broadly as he saw that both the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables were applauding them too. Şeyde fark edecek, çoğu da alkışlıyordu falan. The Slytherin table hissed loudly as they pss, pss. Neydi o, bir yerde vardı kutsal damarın yanında mı ne? O şey işte içine şeytan giren kadın böyle falan bir şeyler yapıyordu sanki. The Slytherin table hissed loudly as they passed. Harry noticed that Malfoy looked even paler than usual. Şu uşak bile heyecanlanmış. Would spend the whole of breakfast urging his team to eat while touching nothing himself. Then he hurried them off to the field before anyone else had finished, so they could get an idea of the conditions. As they left the great hall, everyone applauded again. Good luck, Harry called Cho. Harry felt himself blushing. Okay, now when to speak of, sun's a bit bright. That could impair your vision. Watch out for it, grounds fairly hard. Good. That'll give us a fast kick-off. Herkese verecek ama. Would pace the field, staring around with the team behind him. Finally, they saw the front doors of the castle open in the distance, and the rest of the school spilling onto the lawn. Locker rooms, said Ruth tersely. None of them spoke as they changed into their scarlet robes. Harry wondered if they were feeling like he was, as though he'd eaten something extremely wriggly for breakfast. In what seemed like no time at all, Wood was saying, okay, it's time, let's go. They walked out onto the field to a tidal wave of noise. 3/4 of the crowd was wearing scarlet rosettis, waving scarlet flags with the Gryffindor lion upon them, or brandishing banners with slogans like Go Gryffindor and Lions for the Cup. Behind the Slytherin goal posters, however, 200 people were wearing green. The silver serpent of Slytherin glittered on their flags, and Professor Snape sat in the very front row, wearing green like everyone else, and a very grim smile. Şimdi bu kadar karakter görmüyoruz. Burada Harry Potter için kusurlu olan, Game of Thrones için artı olan bir olay hakkında konuşacağız. Slytherin'de 200 kişi varmış. Slytherin'de 200 kişi varsa diğer binalarda da aşağı yukarı 200 kişi vardır desek, okul 800 kişilik bir okul. Benim lisem 500 kişiydi. 4 sınıftan, sınıf başına 100 kişiden ve lisem bayağı büyüktü falan, hatırlıyorum. 800 kişi çok bayağı fazla, büyük bir sayı yani. Hani sadece Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, Hermione, Lavender, işte Parvati, Neville, Ron, Hermione, Harry. Şu an 9 kişi falan saydım ben. Dean Thomas'ı saydık mı bilmiyorum. Hadi saymamış olalım. Etsin 10. Bu sınıfta en az bir 10 kişi daha olması lazım değil mi? Hatta 20 kişi daha olması lazım. Tamam mı? Çünkü 30 kişi desek 7 sınıf olsa 210 hani. Anladınız mı hesabı? Neyse yok. Neden? Çünkü aşırı olaylar karışacaktı. Çünkü çok fazla karakter olacaktı falan. İşte George R. R. Martin özellikle diyor ki hani diyor böyle sırf 2-3 karakter koyup hani 2-3 karakter koyman seni bir dünyaya oluşturmaya yetmez diyor. O dünyayı oluşturacaksın diyor. Teker teker herkesi yazacaksın diyor. Game of Thrones'da o kadar çok karakter var ki 30, 40, 50 sayfa boyunca sadece böyle karakterleri okuyoruz. Twinler var, şu şey neydi onların adı ya? Şu şerefsiz olanlar işte. Hatta burada Filch'i oynayan adam oynuyor o Frey'lerin başını. Onlar böyle devasa evleniyor Frey. Tamam, hani bunlar asil soylular ama o kadar çok evlenmiş, o kadar çok çocuğu var ki hani böyle resmen kanlarının değeri düşmüş aşırı fazla oldukları için, tamam mı? O derece bir kalabalık var. Neyse işte Frey'in 20 tane karısı var. O 20 karısından 60 tane çocuğu çıkmış. O çocuklar birileriyle evlenmiş. Oradan 120 tane farklı çocuk çıkmış falan. Hani anlatabiliyor muyum? Bunların hepsinin adı var. Hepsine teker teker adı yazmış. İşte kimisi sivilceli Joe, kimisi işte bir şey var. Kaç tane Jon Snow var IQ? İşte Jon var hani. İşte Long John var, Small John var, Jon Snow, The Bastard of Winterfell var. Başka bir iki John daha vardı yanlış hatırlamıyorsam. Sadece 5 tane falan John var. Hani 5 olmasın 3 olsun. Long, Small, Jon Snow, The Bastard. Bu üçü garanti direkt kafamdalar çünkü. Hani bu aynen. Slytherin'de ne bileyim 200 kişi var falan. Kaç tanesini adını biliyoruz? Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, Marcus Flint. 4 IQ. İyi değil yani. Tam Harry bilmeyebilir ama hani işte şöyle bir Slytherin'i çocuk gördü deriz falan. Hani tam yine şey olmuyor. Hani böyle okurken inanılmaz rahatsız olmuyoruz. Bu Harry Potter'da bir sorun var. Böyle olmamalıydı falan olmuyoruz. Ama hani öyle de bir faktör var. George R. R. Martin bunları ayarladı yani. Kendisi yapmak zorunda olduğunu fark etti ve bunu yapmak için özel bir çaba sergiledi falan. Öyle. Ee, Neredeydik lan? Tamam. Şuradan bir daha okuyalım. 200 people were wearing green. The silver serpent of Slytherin glittered on their flags. And Professor Snape sat in the very front row, wearing green like everyone else, and a very grim smile. And here are the Gryffindors, yeah, Lee Jordan, who was acting as commentator as usual. Potter, Bell, Johnson, Spinnet, Weasley, and Wood, widely acknowledged as the best team Hogwarts has seen in a good few years. Lee's comments were drawn by a tide of boos, boo from the Slytherin end. And here comes the Slytherin team led by Captain Flint. He's made some changes in the lineup and seems to be going for size rather than skill. More boos from the Slytherin crowd. Harry, however, thought Lee had a point. Malfoy was easily the smallest person on the Slytherin team. The rest of the team were enormous. Captains, shake hands, said Madame Hooch. Flint and Wood approached each other and grasped each other's hand very tightly. It looked as though each was trying to break the other's fingers. Mind your broom, said Madame Hooch. 3, 2, 1. The sound of her whistle was lost in the roar from the crowd as 14 brooms rose into the air. Harry felt his hair fly back off his forehead. His nerves left him in the thrill of the flight. He glanced around, saw Malfoy on his tail, and sped off in search of the snitch. And it's Gryffindor in possession. Alicia Spinnet of Gryffindor with the quaffle, heading straight for the Slytherin goal posts. Looking good, Alicia. Ah, no. Quaffle intercepted by Warrington. Warrington off. Slytherin team tearing up the field. Wham! Nice bludger work there by George Weasley. Warrington drops the quaffle. It's caught by Johnson. Gryffindor back in possession. Come on, Angelina. Nice swerve around Montague. Dark Angelina, that's a bludger. She scores 10-0 to Gryffindor. Angelina punched the air as she soared around the end of the field. The sea of scarlet below was screaming its delight. Ouch! Angelina was nearly thrown from her broom as Marcus Flint went smashing into her. Sorry, said Flint as the crowd below booed. Sorry, I didn't see her. A moment later, Fred Weasley chucked his beater's club at the back of Flint's head. Flint's nose smashed into the handle of his broom and began to bleed. That will do, shrieked Madame Hooch. Öyle değil. Hani böyle derken sanki Fred'in yaptığı şey doğruymuş gibi bir okuma yaptım. That will do. Böyle çıktı. Shrieked Madame Hooch, zooming between them. Penalty shot to Gryffindor for an unprovoked attack on their chaser. Penalty shot to Slytherin for deliberate damage to their chaser. Come off it, Miss, hauled Fred, but Madame Hooch blew her whistle and Alicia flew forward to take the penalty. Come on, Alicia yelled Lee into the silence that had descended on the crowd. Yes, she's beaten the keeper, 20-0 to Gryffindor. He returned the fireball sharply to watch Flint, still bleeding freely, fly forward to take the Slytherin penalty. Wood was hovering in front of the Gryffindor goal posts, his jaw clenched. Course, Wood is a superb keeper, Lee Jordan told the crowd, as Flint waited for Madame Hooch's whistle. Superb, very difficult to pass, very difficult indeed. Yes, I don't believe it, he saved it. He saved it falan, bu Madagaskar'da lemurlar konuşuyordu, o geldi aklıma. Relieved, Harry zoomed away, gazing around for the snitch, but still making sure he caught every word of Lee's commentary. It was essential that he hold Malfoy off the snitch until Gryffindor was more than 50 points up. Gryffindor in no possession, no. Slytherin in possession, no. Gryffindor back in possession, and it's Kate Bell for Gryffindor with the quaffle. She's streaking up the field. That was deliberate. Montague, a Slytherin chaser, had swerved in front of Katie, and instead of seizing the quaffle, had grabbed her head. Jesus, Katie cartwheeled in the air, managed to stay on her broom, but dropped the quaffle. Madame Hooch's whistle rang out again as she soared over to Montague and began shooting at him. A minute later, Katie had put another penalty past the Slytherin seeker. 30-0, take that, you dirty cheating. Jordan, if you can't commentate in an unbiased way, I'm telling it like it is, Professor. Harry felt a huge jolt of excitement. He had seen the snitch. It was shimmering at the foot of one of the Gryffindor goal posters, but he mustn't catch it yet, and if Malfoy saw it, faking a look of sudden concentration, Harry pulled his firebolt around and sped off toward the Slytherin end. It worked. Malfoy went hurrying after him, clearly thinking Harry had seen the snitch there. Whoosh! One of the bludgers came streaking past Harry's right ear, hit by the gigantic Slytherin beater, Derek. Then again, whoosh! Böyle whoosh, whoosh oluyor bence. The second bludger grazed Harry's elbow. The other beater ball was closing in. Harry had a fleeting glimpse of ball and Derek zooming toward him, clubs raised. He turned the fireball upward at the last second, and ball and Derek collided with a sickening crunch. Ha ha! Yelled Lee Jordan as the Slytherin beaters lurched away from each other, clutching their heads. Too bad, boys. You'll need to get up earlier than that to beat a fireball. And it's Gryffindor in possession. Again, as Johnson takes the quaffle, Flint alongside her. Poke him in the eye, Angelina. It was a joke, Professor, it was a joke. Oh no, Flint in possession. Flint flying toward the Gryffindor goal posters. Come on now, Wood, save. But Flint had scored. There was an eruption of cheers from the Slytherin end, and Lee swore so badly that Professor McGonagall tried to target the magical megaphone away from him, but almaya çalışmış. Sorry, Professor, sorry, won't happen again. So, Gryffindor in the lead, 30 points to 10, and Gryffindor in possession. It was turning into the dirtiest game Harry had ever played in. Enraged that Gryffindor had taken such an early lead, the Slytherins were rapidly resorting to any means to take the quaffle. Ball hit Alicia with his club and tried to say he thought she was a bludger. George Weasley elbowed Ball in the face in retaliation. Madame Hooch awarded both teams penalties and Wood pulled off another spectacular save, making the score 40-10 to Gryffindor. The snitch had disappeared again. Malfoy was still keeping close to Harry as he soared over the match, looking around for it. Once Gryffindor was 50 points ahead. Katie scored 50-10. Fred and George Weasley were swooping around her, clubs raised, in case any of the Slytherins were thinking of revenge. Ball and Derek took advantage of Fred's and George's absence to aim both bludgers at Wood. They caught him in the stomach, one after the other, and he rolled over in the air, clutching his broom, completely winded. Madame Hooch was beside herself. You do not attack the keeper unless the quaffle is within the scoring area. She struck at Ball and Derek. Gryffindor penalty, and Angelina scored 60-10. Moments later, Fred Weasley pelted a bludger at Warrington, knocking the quaffle out of his hands, and he seized it and put it through the Slytherin goal, 70-10. The Gryffindor crowd below was screaming itself hoarse. Gryffindor was 60 points in the lead, and if Harry caught the snitch now, the cup was theirs. Harry could almost feel hundreds of eyes following him as he soared around the field, high above the rest of the game, with Malfoy speeding along behind him. And then he saw it. The snitch was sparkling 20 feet above him. Harry put on a huge burst of speed. The wind was roaring in his ears. He stretched out his hand, but suddenly the firebolt was slowing down. Jesus, ne oluyor? Horrified, he looked around. Malfoy had thrown himself forward, grabbed hold of the fireball's tail, and was pulling it back. Jesus Christ, you... He was angry enough to hit Malfoy, but couldn't reach. Malfoy was panting with the effort of holding onto the firebolt, but his eyes were sparkling maliciously. Şöyle bak. He had achieved what he'd wanted to do. The snitch had disappeared again. Penalty! Penalty to Gryffindor! I've never seen such tactics, Madame Hooch screeched, shooting up to where Malfoy was, sliding back onto his Nimbus 2001. You cheating scum, Lee Jordan was howling into the megaphone, dancing out of Professor McGonagall's reach. You filthy, cheating... derken Professor McGonagall didn't even bother to tell him off. She was actually shaking her finger in Malfoy's direction. Şöyle yapıyor herhalde. Her head had fallen off and she too was shooting furiously. Felicia took Gryffindor's penalty, but she was so angry she missed by several feet. The Gryffindor team was losing concentration and the Slytherins, delighted by Malfoy's foul of Harry, were being spurred on to greater heights. Slytherin in possession, Slytherin heading for goal, Montague scores, Louis ground, 70-20 to Gryffindor. Harry was now marking Malfoy so closely, their knees kept hitting each other. Harry wasn't going to let Malfoy anywhere near the snitch. Get out of it, Potter, Malfoy yelled in frustration as he tried to turn and found Harry blocking him. Angelina Johnson gets the quaffle for Gryffindor. Come on, Angelina, come on, come on. Harry looked around. Every single Slytherin player apart from Malfoy was streaking up the pitch toward Angelina, including the Slytherin keeper. They were all going to block her. He revealed the fireball around, went so low he was lying flat along the handle and kicked it forward like a bullet. He shot toward the Slytherins. Kahramanımız nereye? They scattered as the fireball zoomed toward them. Angelina's way was clear. She scores, she scores. Gryffindor leads by 80 points to 20. Harry, who had almost pelted headlong into the stands, skidded to a hold in mid-air, reversed, and zoomed back into the middle of the field. And then he saw something to make his heart stand still. Malfoy was diving, a look of triumph on his face. There, a few feet above the grass below, was a tiny golden glimmer. Harry urged the fireball downward, but Malfoy was miles ahead. Go, go, go, Harry urged his broom. He was gaining on Malfoy. Harry flattened himself to the broom handle as ball sent a bludgeon at him. He was at Malfoy's ankles. He was leveled. Harry threw himself forward, took both hands off his broom. He knocked Malfoy's arm out of the way and yes! He pulled out of his dive, his hand in the air, and the stadium exploded. Harry soared above the crowd, an odd ringing in his ears. The tiny golden ball was held tight in his fist. Şarjım bitiyor. Beating its wings hopelessly against his fingers. Then Wood was speeding toward him, half blinded by tears. He seized Harry around the neck and sobbed unrestrainedly into his shoulder. Ağlamaya başlamış. Harry felt two large thumbs as Fred and George hit them. Then Angelina's, Alicia's, and Katie's voices. We've won the cup! We've won the cup! Tangled together in a many-armed hug, the Gryffindor team sang, yelling hoarsely back to earth. Wave upon wave of crimson supporters was pouring over the barriers onto the field. Hands were raining down on their backs. Harry had a confused impression of noise and bodies pressing in on him. Then he and the rest of the team were hoisted onto the shoulders of the crowd. Thrust into the light, he saw Hagrid, plastered with crimson rosettas. You bet him, Harry, you bet him. Wait till I tell Buckbeak, there was Percy jumping up and down like a maniac, all dignity forgotten. Hani şu bile All dignity forgotten. Hani Percy'den bahsediyor. O bile unutuyor her şeyi falan. Hani cidden böyle şey yani. Aşırı bir hareket var ortada. Professor McGonagall was sobbing harder even than wood, wiping her eyes with an enormous Gryffindor flag, and there, fighting their way toward Harry, were Ron and Hermione. Words failed them. They simply beamed as Harry was borne toward the stands, where Dumbledore stood waiting with the enormous Quidditch cup. If only there had been a Dementor around, as the sobbing wood passed Harry the cup, as he lifted it into the air, Harry felt he could have produced the world's best Patronus. Şimdi hani dediydim ya ben neden şimdi Patronus yapmaya hazır mutluyken falan dediydim. Şimdi ama aklıma şey de geldi. Yani bu şimdi rüyalarında çatal boynuzlu geyiği falan görüyor. Hani o çatal boynuzlu geyik daha oluşmadı falan. Aynen. Öyle bir şey var. Hani onun bir oluşum aşaması var. İyice böyle oluşmuş olacak birkaç gün ya da birkaç bölüm içinde falan ve en son onu yapacak. Expecto Patronum falan diyecek böyle öyle. Şimdi artık bence şeyde geliyoruz. Bölümü görmedim de artık olaylar başlıyor. Asıl olaylar final game, end game olayları başlıyor ve bayağı saran yerleri okuyacağız. Chapter 16, Professor Trelawney's Prediction. Buna ait bölüm varmış belki bilmiyordum. Bu Hagrid'in eli, bu da Scabbers belki. Bayağı zayıflamış çıktı. Tamam, hadi görüşürüz.